About 30 seconds. Good afternoon, Eastern Washington and fellow patriots. This is Matt Shea, and welcome to Patriot Radio, a very serious Patriot Radio broadcast today. And I would please ask everyone to pay attention today. There are not just serious things happening in the world, but there are impacts here locally that you're going to want to know about, and you're going to want to prepare for. In addition to that, we are going to be breaking in on American Christian Network when we can, when we have crises like this happen again. We will be coming on for an update, and it'll just break into regular radio as we're able to do that. So that's going to be happening in the future. The second thing is, if you have not subscribed to our Telegram channel at On Fire Ministries, please do that as soon as you possibly can. I had real-time intelligence, some of the best on the internet. In fact, I think it is the best on the internet, and it was compiled from a whole bunch of different sources. So as an aggregate, I didn't see anything out there that compared with it around the world. We also had our own private sources, and I was able to do a couple of updates from private sources that wasn't anywhere else on the internet, including on Twitter. So please subscribe to our Telegram channel so you know what's happening and what's about to happen. Remember that Patriot Radio is brought to you by On Fire Ministries and the legacy of Dr. Stan Monteith, bringing you the story behind the story and the news behind the news. And today is going to challenge, well, it's going to challenge a lot of people, because the preconceived notions, the narrative fight that is out there right now is seeking to lead you astray, take your eye off the ball. Really, we should have our focus straight on Jesus Christ. And I'm going to read some quotes today that are going to challenge you. They're going to challenge your mindset. They're going to challenge the amplification of particular narratives, even on the conservative side. And as a result of that, it may upset you, but it's the truth. And so we at Patriot Radio have always sought to bring you the truth no matter what was going on. And there's a lot happening. Even as I'm talking to you right now, we go live here on the show across all of Eastern Washington, North Idaho, Western Montana, and beyond. Sift it all. Pray about it. Sift it all. But don't use what you think you know as the standard, because a lot of what you think you know probably isn't true, especially in regards to history. And we're going to talk about that, and I'm going to give some very specific primary sources to back that up. With that said, this is not about right or left. This is about right and wrong. This is about choosing in this time right. And the fact of the matter is, the Marxists and the jihadis are coming together right now, backing each other right now. Marxist groups across this country and their spawn, like Indivisible, which has groups here, the Socialist Rifle Association, Redneck Revolt, the John Brown Gun Club, and more, including Black Lives Matter, are coming out in various places on the internet and endorsing the wholesale slaughter of Jewish people and babies in their homes. Folks, this is the exposure of evil that many of you have been waiting for. It is happening right now. And we can see now that the socialists and the Marxists have aligned themselves with evil. And as Christians, as patriots, it is our job in this time to stand. And he who has the most hope has the most influence. And our hope is in Jesus Christ, not in man. But we also can't end in prayer. We must also move to action. Zechariah 2:5 in this time, I think, is so apropos. And this is the verse the Lord gave me at the beginning of the year. But I declares the Lord will be a fire. Oh, man. I will be a wall of fire to her on all sides, and I will be the glory in her midst. Whew. First of all, the communists and the jihadis have been working together since at least the 1960s. For those of you that don't know history, I'm going to do a quick repeat. In 1917, the Ottoman Turks lost the war, and in 1924, the caliphate was abolished on March 3rd. The date that happened the other day was 50 years, in 1973, 50 years to October 6th, 2024. They did this intentionally on a date. Dates matter, and I keep talking about this. Dates matter. They don't just arbitrarily pick this as targets of opportunity. Although there may be targets of opportunity on the day, they pick the day because of its historical significance. And this day was 50 years after the 1973 Yom Kippur War, when they surprised Israel the first time. So they picked this day intentionally. And if you heard what I just said, the caliphate was abolished on March 3rd, 1924. Well, 100 years from that date is March 3rd, 2024. So we're going to start looking. Doesn't necessarily mean it'll be on the exact date because they want to have some element of surprise. But it tells me we're going to be looking to that time frame because they see it as historically significant that they reclaim the caliphate. So as we talk today, the things that I'm going to be saying are in the context of the dates of history that they understand far better than we do. Because October 10th, 732 was the day that Charles the Hammer Martel stopped the Muslim invasion of Western Europe at the Battle of Tours, France. This is a huge day. And once again, the invasion of Islamic armies, this time into Israel, is threatening not just a broader war, but to repeat history, or at least make it rhyme. Now, let's talk about the biblical perspective here. What does the Bible have to say about this? Psalm 121. I will raise my eyes to the mountains. From where will my help come? Mountains in the scripture are kingdoms. So in other words, will government help me? I raise my eyes to the kingdom of the world, and will it help me? Nope. And he answers, my help comes from the Lord, who made heaven and earth, who will not allow your foot to slip. He who watches over you will not slumber. In other words, God watches over the individual, and then it says, behold, he who watches over Israel will neither slumber nor sleep. And because we are of the seed of Abraham as Christians, we are covered by God who never slumbers or sleeps. And it says this, the Lord is your protector, the Lord is your shade on your right hand. Your right hand is your sword hand, by the way. The sun will not beat down on you by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord will protect you from all evil. He will keep your soul, and the Lord will guard your going out and your coming in from this time and forevermore. The fact of the matter is that the purpose of communism, Marxism, purpose of the jihadis is to destroy Christianity. And they have been working together, like I said, since at least the 1960s. And we call this the red-green axis. In fact, Carlos the Jackal, one of the most infamous terrorists in the entire history of the world, said this, quote, only a coalition of Islamists and Marxists can destroy the United States. And that is what we are seeing coming together right now. And those of you, and I'm going to challenge you right now, that have been apologizing for Russia, you've been apologizing for the red-green axis. And now we see some of the fruit of that in Israel. I'm going to read this next quote and then tell you who said it. The KGB boss described the Muslim world as a waiting petri dish in which we could nurture a strain of hate America. We had only to keep repeating over and over that the United States was a warmongering Zionist country financed by Jewish money with the goal of taking over the whole world. That was the highest ranking KGB defector to the United States of America, Lieutenant General Mihai Pachipa. Now, interestingly enough, he wrote that in the book Disinformation. I take him at his word that he knows what he's talking about, that he was part of the information operations, which, by the way, I'm seeing repeated on social media today by people on the right, and they have no clue they are part of a KGB disinformation operation. He was quoted as saying this years and years ago, so this isn't like shoehorning something in. Stop being a part of the KGB disinformation. And yes, a former KGB guy is still running Russia. And yes, he is still working very closely and directly with the Palestinians, with Hamas particularly, and the Muslim Brotherhood. Because that's what he did in the KGB. His statements even recently, very clear whose side he's on. And it's not Christians. So those of you that have been backing Vladimir Putin, not only should you rethink your position, but you need to understand history, and I'm going to drive this point home right now. Before 1969 came to an end, Palestinian terrorists trained at the KGB's Balashika Special Operations School east of Moscow had hijacked their first Zionist El Al plane and landed it in Algeria, where its 32 Jewish passengers were held hostage for 5 weeks. The hijacking had been planned. Hear what I just said. The KGB trained the Muslim hijackers and then planned and coordinated by the KGB's 13th department, known in Soviet bloc intelligence jargon, for the wet affairs. That was the bloody affairs. So the KGB's 13th department helped to coordinate that hijacking in 1969. More than that, they trained Muslims how to hijack airplanes. Most of you have never read that. Again, Lieutenant General Mihai Pachipa in his book Disinformation. Then he goes a step further. Before he left Romania for good, this is General Pachipa, in 1978, his DAI, that was his intelligence services, had dispatched around 500 undercover agents to Islamic countries. According to a rough estimate received from Moscow, by 1978, the whole Soviet bloc intelligence community had sent some 4,000 such agents of influence into the Islamic world. This is going to challenge a lot of you, but the fact of the matter is the KGB infiltrated these Islamic organizations. Yasser Arafat, KGB agent. Mahmoud Abbas, well, guess what? On the KGB payroll? How about Ayman al-Zawahiri with the Muslim Brotherhood and Al-Qaeda? Most of you had no clue about that. But the fact remains that the KGB trained the majority of these terrorists, and they are still working together even to this day. And the reports that are coming out is that Wagner Group, and some of this is being confirmed as we speak, that Wagner Group trained some of these Hamas people on how to use drones and to attack not only stationary targets like the outposts right there on the border with Gaza, but also armored vehicles. So this wasn't just Iran. There was technical expertise and there was specific electronic warfare technology used in the invasion of Israel by Hamas that could only have come from a peer level nation state actor. Yes, they may have given it to Iran knowing that Iran was going to give it to Hamas. And that brings us with what happened in Israel over the last few days. I'm going to go through a whole bunch here, so hold on to your hats as we come to your daily intelligence briefing. The Middle East. First of all, this is very interesting, and this flew under the radar. Top lawmakers in Russia are discussing a possible revocation of the treaty banning nuclear tests. In other words, the Russians may be starting aggression as far as a nuclear test for the first time since 92 is the last time there was any sort of a test by Russia or the United States. More than that, listen to this. Finland's president says that there were damages done to the Baltic Connector gas pipeline and a communication cable connecting Finland with Estonia, and they were the results of, quote, external activity. I'm going to get to that one here in a little bit, but it appears that there was a Russian boat operating in the area. In addition to that, on the ground in Israel, Hamas came across the border and I'm going to be very graphic here. If there is anybody listening right now and you have kids in the car, I would probably turn it off and wait to listen to the podcast later. When they came across the border, Hamas was just following Islamic law, which means you can take women as captives and use them as sex slaves. And so as they landed and as they drove into this festival that was happening on the border with Gaza, not only did they slaughter women, but they raped them next to the bodies of their dead friends. They then went into the communities, kibbutzes, that were very close to that, and began slaughtering people en masse. Men, women, children. In fact, there's a video of a dad who was getting his entire family out the window, and they all escaped, and then he took the bullet and died as his family lived. Coming today, some of the most brutal footage I have ever seen in my life, and I've been in 2 war zones. Israeli babies were beheaded in one of the kibbutzes. Some of the families were burned alive. And again, some of the women are missing. That brings us to the next thing, that American Special Operations Forces trained in hostage situations have arrived in Israel, according to Visegrad. You also have a couple other things that are happening as well, and I'm going to get into these in detail just in a second. But one of them back here in America that I want to talk about is that Black Lives Matter has come out on a couple of social media sites backing this wholesale slaughter that was done by Hamas. In other words, they're backing the enemies of the United States. I think that Black Lives Matter now, if they are backing a recognized terrorist organization, should be declared a terrorist organization inside the United States of America, and that should be up for discussion and very clearly soon in Congress. I hope somebody does that. Also, the war in Israel is going to be a regional war. Now, if you remember, over a year and a half ago, right here on Patriot Radio, not only did we call the invasion of Ukraine by Russia to the day right after the Olympics ended, but I said before that invasion that Russia would do that first, and then Iran and Israel would go to war, and then right shortly sometime after that, China would attempt to invade Taiwan. So we're seeing this play out right now in real time. And this is becoming a regional war. I'm going to cite some specific examples right now. No longer a Palestinian organization, Hezbollah takes responsibility for firing an anti-tank missile at an armored vehicle that was destroyed in northern Israel. Also, Turkish President Recep Erdogan made an aggressive and scandalous statement against the Biden administration. Quote, "The U.S. is sending an aircraft carrier to Israel. What is it doing in Israel? What does it deserve to do? They will attack Gaza with their fighter jets and commit a massacre." Well, there was another report that he actually warned the United States to stay out of this conflict. Recep Erdogan, once again, by all accounts, believes he's going to be the next caliph. So we're watching this very carefully, because if the United States weighs in, and the United States looks like it's being drawn in because it had hostages taken, we have had our own people taken. So in some respect, we're drawn in already, that Turkey now is threatening and that this may end up being a broader war. Well, it did end up a little bit after this tweet being a broader war. First, Hezbollah began attacking on the northern front. An Iraqi militia commander that works closely with Hezbollah has now gone into that area, and you're seeing the mobilization right now of forces across Lebanon and Syria, which are huge. These are huge forces. I'm talking like 250,000 people in the number. So a third front is also opening up now in the northeast in Syria. And the 101st Airborne Division of the United States was deployed to Jordan, so right next to all of this stuff. And in addition to that, Israel has warned Egypt that any convoys sent to Gaza will be destroyed. Egypt plans on sending convoys despite the targeting. Israel has confirmed that the U.S. will directly enter the war if Hezbollah invades from the north. Russia has suggested that if the United States enters the war, Syria, Egypt, Lebanon, Iran, and Iraq will also join the fray, and Saudi and Emirati leaders have begun setting the stage for peace talks, but at this late hour, Israel is poised to strike, and I don't think anything is going to stop them. And that last part came to us from S2 Underground. It's a great source of intelligence. So we've got guerrilla warfare happening now on pipelines between Finland and Estonia. And if you look at this article, if Travis, you could pull this up real quick, it shows where this happened. There's a hole in the pipeline. Finland suspects Russia because a Russian survey vessel was conducting underwater activities throughout the summer near that place. You've got Recep Erdogan sounding off. Also, coming to us from OSINT Defender, U.S. Special Operations teams and intelligence analysts have reportedly arrived in Israel's advisors to assist the Israeli Defense Force in the rescuing of hostages in Gaza once the ground invasion begins. In other words, the U.S. is already drawn in because our hostages are there. All right, that's what's happening overseas. What's happening here? Well, like I said, on this day in history, Charles Martel defeated the Moors at the Battle of Tours, France. And Travis, you can bring that up. This is a statue of him. So the leaders of Hamas understand that this day is significant. So I would not be surprised if by sundown today in the United States that we hear of a ground invasion beginning in Israel. But that brings us home. What about here in the United States? Our southern border has been wide open. 61,000 plus people of interest. Okay, in other words, people that are coming from areas of interest around the world have gone across the southern border. Sam Faddis, on his Twitter feed, if we could pull that up right now, says this: 4 days before Hamas started its assault, Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei posted a message on the X social media platform saying the usurper regime, a reference to Israel, is coming to an end. And yet people in our State Department are confused about who's behind this. Well, then Sam Faddis put this out. How long until Gaza happens here? Because the Iranians have intentionally infiltrated people across the southern border, and our guest is going to be talking about that today, Clare Lopez. Clearly, there have been terror cells set up inside the United States. I don't think anybody disputes that. So how long until something like that happens here? And I just want to add a real quick comment. This is one of the reasons, not the only, but one of the reasons for the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms. That's why we should have the ability to carry an AR-15 and have as much ammunition as we want. Because it was a strategic deterrent to these kind of actions, even back, just in modern times in the 1960s. Our civil defense plan was based around this idea of every person having a firearm, but particularly able-bodied males, to be a strategic deterrent against the communists, Russia at that time. So, how long until it happens here? That's a fantastic question, but I'm going to tell you this. Think about the holidays coming up. Black Friday, for example. Soft targets all through there. And the fact is, a report just came out last week that an Iranian influence network had penetrated to the highest levels of the United States government. So we're in a serious situation, and U.S. counterintelligence just needs to be rebuilt from the ground up. That said, Psalm 121 now. If they can't defend ourselves, or they can't defend us, then we need to defend ourselves. So if we're looking to the government to defend us right now, we need to be prepared to defend ourselves and our communities. I was reading one report from a kibbutz over there in Israel where they were screaming and just, they wish they had had a weapon. And then there was one incident where a couple, a man and a wife, put their kids in a safe place and fought it out and died defending their children. The children survived, but they had weapons to fight back with. So you kind of have these two scenarios where it's very clear that weapons are needed now. And particularly when you have Marxist organizations applauding Hamas here in the United States of America, which brings us to the National Pulse. BLM's LA branch backs Hamas terrorism. In a statement posted on their verified Instagram account, Black Lives Matter Los Angeles has endorsed the Hamas terror raids on Israel over the weekend, calling their resistance an act of self-defense. Cutting the heads off babies is not self-defense, very clearly. But can you see this? BLM's promoting terrorism. Can you hear this? Wow. And the FBI is spending most of its time investigating patriots? That also brings us to the Western Journal and Ilhan Omar. Democrat Minnesota Rep. Ilhan Omar, a founding member of the far-left squad who has a documented history of anti-Semitism, so obvious even fellow Democrats can't ignore it, took to social media on Monday in a lengthy thread that accused Israel of a war crime for its retaliation plans against the Hamas terrorist organization that murdered hundreds of civilians in an attack on Saturday. I want to talk real quick from a Christian perspective about just war. When somebody attacks you, you have the right to defend yourself. That is the idea behind just war theory. I've taught that for years, and as a pastor, I still teach that we don't go seeking a fight, but when it comes to us, we finish it. And that is exactly what Israel is doing, and they have every right to do it right now. That also brings us to the last article here from Western Journal. Former CIA director calls for assassination of Republican senator. So this is an interesting thing. CIA director and retired General Michael Hayden, he took to Twitter and this is what he said. Okay, what's Hayden's solution? Well, Tuberville, so this is Senator Tommy Tuberville. He's been very outspoken about standing against 300 military nominees who he believes are not qualified because of their wokeness and among other reasons. And Tuberville refuses to budge. However, in the heat of all this happening, General Michael Hayden comes out on Twitter and he responds to a question by Nathalie Jacoby. Should Tommy Tuberville be removed from his committee, yes or no? And he says the following: how about the human race? In other words, should Senator Tuberville be removed from the human race? Wow. Ladies and gentlemen, I never thought we would see this kind of vitriol internally, but that's exactly where we're at. Just being honest with you, I thought that there would be some coming together for those that love America But right now, what we're seeing is a very clear line being drawn in the sand between those who love America and those who support the communists and the jihadis across the world. All right, breaking news. This is coming this is coming so fast. I just want to make sure that you all hear this. All right, an urgent advisory from the Israeli government that in the next few hours, Hamas terrorists are expected to disseminate photos and videos of hostages and acts of torture across social media platforms. In other words, Hamas is going to begin executing and torturing people on camera that are hostages and spreading across social media. And the Israeli government is saying, please do not share those things. Also, just coming in, the bedroom of a toddler who was brutally murdered by Hamas just came out as well. Wow. And it looks like the Israelis are beginning to dramatically increase their strikes. We're going to pull that up right now as we're talking on the radio to see real time what is happening before we bring our guest on. And it looks like right now, coming to us from OSINT Defender, the death toll of Israeli civilians who were killed has now risen past 1,200. Airstrikes are continuing in northern Gaza Strip tonight, with a lot of the strikes being near the border, most likely in preparation for eventual ground operations. I completely concur with that. That was just before we came on the show that they said that. And the Israeli Navy has begun to shell the coastline of Gaza Strip once again. Again, that probably is in preparation for a naval landing of some kind, probably by Israeli special forces. And then it says this, the Netherlands, Germany, and Austria have all announced today their plan to send military aircraft to Israel in the coming days in order to evacuate any of the citizens who still remain in the country. So not only are evacuations ongoing, but things continuing to ramp up pretty dramatically. Coming to us from Fatux News. Let's take a look here real quick. Doesn't look like a ton of new stuff there. There we go. It looks like widespread calls on social media for Palestinians to gather to confront the IDF in West Bank cities, such as Jenin and Nablus. So what's happening is now the calls are going across social media to spread this to the West Bank. So as we've talked about earlier in the intelligence brief, you have Hezbollah coming down from the north. You now have Syria, an officially opened front there in the northeast. And now in the West Bank, it looks like as well, the call is being put forward. Last thing, 22 Palestinian militants have been killed in Israel today in areas surrounding the Gaza Strip. So they're still mopping up pockets of terrorists that have survived inside of Israel. And Hezbollah just released footage of an armored vehicle being attacked by an anti-tank guided missile. So this is, again, looking like it's going to expand beyond the borders of Israel into a regional conflict. In fact, that was probably the planning from the beginning, to do something so horrendous, so awful, that Israel would have to respond to it and the rest of the countries would be drawn in. I'm going to check one last source here before we bring our guest on. Let's see here. Oh, yeah, this one too. And this was from yesterday, but very important that a lot of people don't know that the Nazis actually recruited from the Palestinians during World War II. And the Post-Millennial has this article. A pro-Hamas supporter flashed an image of a swastika to Jews in Times Square just a couple days ago. So you have these things it's World War II redux, people aligning together again. And by the way, so let's see, BLM supports the Palestinians. Palestinians are flashing swastikas. So who's supporting the Nazi side? Interesting. Definitely not the right, and definitely not Christians and patriots. So this is just really plain stuff. And the last thing that I want to talk about before we bring our guest on is this from a Christian perspective, okay? We need to see the times that we're in not from necessarily a negative view. Yes, I just went through a whole bunch of things about war, but the fact is the enemy is raging because God is already on the move. There have been revivals across this country and across the world that have happened recently. And oftentimes it's war that drives people to their knees in prayer. The best thing that we could do right now is pray. And as General Patton said, it is a spiritually alert minority that carries the burdens and brings the victory. We win this foremost on our knees. So if you need to do something and you're just like, what do I do now? Get on your knees and pray. Pray for the peace of Israel. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. Pray for the peace of the United States. Pray the evil would be exposed and that those behind it would be held accountable. These are things we can be praying right now, engaging that spiritual warfare right now as Americans. And I believe it is on our knees that we win this thing. In World War II, for example, they would come together in the city squares and they would pray at least once a week, sometimes every day, for victory in World War II and for the protection of soldiers and the quick end of the war. So if you don't know what to do now, you can always pray. But also, please get prepared. Have enough food on hand, not just for yourselves, but to bring another family into your house to be able to help them in this time. I've talked about preparedness in the past. There are many, many articles I put out about it. Be prepared right now because this could happen here in the United States with this open southern border. And it could happen at a time that we are not expecting, like during a holiday. So it behooves all of us to be prepared. There's no fear here. Be prepared to love other people, to shelter them, and to help them in a crisis. From a Christian perspective, as a pastor, but I'm no longer going to talk from a Christian perspective. I'm going to talk from the point of truth. There is evil in the world and there is good. Chopping the heads off little babies, raping women next to the bodies of their dead friends, invading without provocation another country. These are all evil things. And the source of this, at least in modern times, has come out of the former Soviet Union. And we just need to be blunt. We need to accept that truth that is irrefutable. And understand that their purpose, ultimately, is to destroy the United States of America and Christians. And the only thing standing between them and victory is you and me. And that is why we need to act, and we need to pray, and we need to prepare, because it is the United States of America that will be that beacon of hope to the rest of the world. And that is the briefing. Remember, the antidote to dependency and socialism is to be a God-fearing, self-reliant, freedom-loving American. Thank you to everybody that has been praying for us. But please be praying for the peace in Israel and Jerusalem and the peace in the United States and the protection of our soldiers overseas as well. That is what you can do right now. Also, take a moment, go and subscribe to Rumble, subscribe to our Telegram channel where we had real live intelligence feeds for the last 3 days. Check it out. But boy, be praying. Please be praying. And share this with your friends and family so they know what's really going on and where it came from. And that brings us to our guest today, Clare Lopez. Clare is one of the nation's foremost experts on counterintelligence, the Middle East, jihad, and Iran. She has served the nation tirelessly in numerous leadership roles at the tip of the spear in national security. Clare, it is a pleasure to have you back on once again, although the circumstances are horrendous.
Yes, thanks for having me, Matt. I'm glad to be with you, and it needs to be talked about. So I'm very glad that you're doing the program and glad to be with you.
Well, let's talk a little bit about, first of all, what do you expect in the next 24 hours in the Middle East, and particularly whether this will expand to a broader war?
Well, we know that over 350,000 Israeli reservists have been called up. They are currently staging around the northern border of Israel. I'm sorry, northern border of Gaza, southern border of Israel, getting ready for the ground operation. Probably, maybe not 24 hours, but let's say within 48 hours or so. They will go into Gaza. The Air Force, the Israeli Air Force, is hitting multiple dozens of targets ahead of time, trying to take out leadership, trying to take out missile rocket launch sites. But within the next, I would say, 48 hours or so, by this weekend, I think we can expect to see the Israeli ground forces of the IDF going into Gaza to take out and completely destroy Hezbollah and also PIJ, Palestinian Islamic Jihad.
So that brings up the question. Iran has threatened to intervene if the United States does. Turkey, at least in what seems to be a veiled threat, is indicating it might get involved. You have the 101st Airborne in Jordan right now. It looks like there's a front opening up in the northeast of Israel and Syria. You have Iraqi militia commanders that are tied to Hezbollah moving into the area. I mean, do you think this is going to ignite into a broader war?
It could, but I think at the moment the decision is being made in Iran. That's the headquarters for all of this. We know from the Wall Street Journal article, of course, from a couple of days ago, that Iran is the one that planned, organized, and directed Hamas in the execution of these attacks that began this past Saturday. The decisions are being made in Tehran. We know also that from August of this past summer, that meetings were held among Iranian top leadership, IRGC, Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, Quds Force. Even the foreign minister, Abdullahian, appeared at one or more of these meetings held in Beirut, Lebanon, also together with Hezbollah, with Hamas, and the PIJ top leadership also planning this out. So currently those decisions are still being made out of Tehran. I've heard various experts, including senior, retired, former IDF military officers, who have assessed that at this moment, Iran is holding Hezbollah back, that they have decided in Tehran that Hamas can be sacrificed. Because Israel will destroy it. It can be sacrificed so long as Hezbollah and its capabilities, and as possibly as many as 150,000 rockets, missiles, some of them fitted with updated precision guidance systems, not all of them, but many of them, preserving that capability for when the time comes, and it will come, when Israel has to make a decision about Iran's nuclear weapons program. And they wanted to preserve Hezbollah for that conflict to come. As for those other areas, yes, there have been, from Lebanon too, some rockets and mortars fired, also some attempts at cross-border intrusions into Israeli space. They were taken care of. Yes, also a few shots fired off of the Golan Heights. The Israelis can take care of that as well. And then, of course, the Hashda Shabi, or sometimes called the Popular Mobilization Units, that are under the supervision, the control, direction of the Quds Force. Ismail Qani, by the way, he is the successor to the late, not very belated, but in any way, gone off to meet his virgins, Qasem Soleimani, that President Trump took care of back in January of 2020 when he was in office. So Ismail Qani is the one who directs those Iraqi-based militias. There is a danger there for American forces that are located on bases throughout Iraq, supporting the Iraqi military. They have come under fire at a regular basis, more or less, previously, but certainly it is Iran that controls those Hashda Shabi, as they call them, militia units, and they have been stirring up some trouble too. But it doesn't look yet like a full-on order has been given for everybody to rise up, although exhortations have been made towards militias in particularly Samaria, I think not so much Judea, but Samaria, towns like Jenin and Nablus and Tulkarm, where there are clan-based local jihadi militias that have launched attacks of different kinds, shooting attacks, car ramming attacks, knifing attacks in places like Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. And the airwaves aimed at them are trying to stir them up. But that also is something that the Israeli Defense Forces can take care of.
So that brings up a couple of questions. The Israelis being surprised. I think for a lot of us, that was kind of one of the biggest questions out there. How possibly could they have been surprised? And then the corollary question, was any Russian electronic warfare technology given to Iran, which was then given to Hamas?
Well, let's go to the last question first, because yes, it does look like there was a massive cyber attack against Israel, preceding and carrying on through the attack itself. A lot of the border between Israel and Gaza, and I've been there multiple times, consists of wired, sensor-embedded wire fencing. And those embedded sensors in the wire fencing are supposed to alert nearby border police if there is anything or anyone approaching, anything from a rabbit to an incursion like this. But that could have been knocked out. The cameras perhaps knocked out. So yes, that technology could have been provided to the Hamas jihadis by Iran. Very possibly, I don't know that for a fact, but that's a possibility. So why else was Israel taken so much by surprise? Well, number one, it was the morning of Shabbat, and people were either in their homes for the day and or maybe getting ready to go to the synagogue for prayers. It was also the last day of the week-long celebration of Sukkot that followed the high holy days of Rosh Hashanah and then Yom Kippur. The week after them came Sukkot, and this was the end of that week. People were still in a celebratory, probably frame of mind. Many of the IDF forces had been drawn off also, maybe at home to celebrate, but also drawn off to areas in Samaria and to the northern border of Israel with Lebanon. So a number of troops that you might have thought would be in southern Israel, close to Gaza, were not, and took much too long to get there, while the savage jihadis were slaughtering people. So all of those reasons taken together, but one more, and that is that I think Iran helped to tutor, if you will, the Hamas forces in PSYOPs. And so, as people may know who are listening, Israel provided Hamas, provided Gaza with water, electricity, food shipments coming in from UNRWA, in particular, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, and also jobs. Something like 20,000 Gazans crossed over the checkpoints every day to go into Israel to work at jobs that paid them, 8 or 10 times what they could make in Gaza. And so the impression was deliberately given to the Israelis, I think, this is a possibility of one of the scenarios, that Hamas was content with these economic measures that helped the people. And they wanted that impression to be given to Israel. And Israel apparently believed that. Now, there are other indications that Israeli intelligence did know about some of those meetings, those planning meetings we just mentioned up in Beirut over the August till October timeframe, but may have come to the wrong analytical conclusions about what those indicators and warnings really meant and really purported. They may have been consumed, may have been otherwise distracted by a lot of domestic political tumult inside of Israeli politics too.
And in the last few minutes that we have, a quick history on where did Hamas come from and what is the threat to the U.S. homeland because of an open southern border where who knows how many terror cells have come across?
Well, Hamas is the Gaza branch of the jihadist Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood. And way back in the 1960s, when Yasser Arafat's Palestinian Liberation Organization, the PLO, was wreaking havoc, beginning to wreak havoc with attacks and kidnappings and so forth, the Israeli government actually took the decision that supporting the predecessor to Hamas, it was not yet formed, but the predecessor to Hamas, under the leadership of one Sheikh Yassin, was a counterbalance or could be a counterweight somehow to Yasser Arafat, who was seen as the more dangerous threat at that time. The Israeli government actually helped Hamas to get formed. Now, Hamas proper did not take shape or become formed until 1988. That is 1 year after the outbreak of the first Intifada. 1988 is the year that Hamas first put out its covenant, and that can be found in English translation PDF online. And of course, it's called a covenant because it's not an agreement between men and men or groups and groups. It is a commitment between Hamas and God. That's why they call it a covenant. Mm-hmm. And in the first opening lines of that covenant, it basically says, Israel exists and will exist, continue to exist until Islam obliterates it as it has others before it. I'm paraphrasing just a little bit, but in essence, that's what the opening lines of the Hamas covenant say, so you understand where their motivation comes from. So Hamas itself formally took shape by 1988 and then was involved in that first Intifada and later on in the second Intifada that broke out in the year 2000 as well. The Israelis, I think, have lived to rue the day that they helped Hamas, its predecessor, to be formed, to be allowed to develop in Gaza.
Now, the Muslim Brotherhood, as we both know, is the largest threat as far as jihadi organizations are concerned. I know arguably there might be a bigger one with the OIC, but I want to talk specifically about the Muslim Brotherhood in the United States. What is the danger to the U.S. homeland right now because of the southern border? And are these threats that something might happen here in the U.S. real, legitimate?
Well, certainly they are real. The Muslim Brotherhood in the United States operates through a vast network of front groups. Folks might be most familiar with groups like CARE, Council on American Islamic Relations, or maybe ISNA, Islamic Society of North America. Many others are front groups for the Muslim Brotherhood. But in the United States, and really elsewhere in the world, the Muslim Brotherhood has never, ever carried out any violence or act of terrorism against America or Americans. And that's why the Muslim Brotherhood cannot be designated to the foreign terrorist organizations list. It operates more as a dawah, a propaganda outfit, information operations. They operate through the interfaith dialogue movement, those kinds of initiatives. More to the point of the second part of your question there, the border. In the last couple of years and a half that the Biden administration's been in power, that southern border with Mexico has been absolutely wide open. We have no idea who all have come through there, who continue to come through there. We do know that Customs and Border Protection, which are doing absolutely the best job they possibly can, despite incredible constraints on them actually fulfilling their own jobs, but they have intercepted, apprehended near 200. The number is 180 something, I think, at this point in time, of individuals trying to cross that border on the terror watch list of the United States. We don't even know how many others have gotten in as so-called gotaways. They saw them, but they didn't catch them, or those who were just never even seen. We know from reporting by investigative reporters like Todd Bensman and Michael Ion, who have been at the border with Mexico on down through Central America at the Darien Gap that sits between South America, Colombia, and Panama, that they have watched, in particular in recent weeks, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of single, young, military-aged men without wives, without families, children, coming through, headed north. The NGOs, the Christian, Catholic, and other groups of NGOs, non-governmental organizations, like Catholic Charities, the Methodist, the Hebrew Aid Society, they used to be called, are aiding and abetting, along with the United Nations, these illegals with food, clothing, shoes, backpacks, and debit cards that get reloaded every month to bring those illegals north. And among those young, single, fighting-aged, military-looking men are hundreds of Chinese who, by their appearance and behavior, appear to be possibly part of something called the Jungle Tigers, which is the designation for the 75th Special Operations Brigade of the Chinese People's Liberation Army. So yes, there's much to be feared. They're already inside the country, never mind the special airlift by the Department of Defense out of Kabul 2 years ago of unvetted Afghans. And if Al-Qaeda and the Taliban had not seeded that flow with their own jihadis, I'd be much surprised. They're all here. It's going to happen. It's coming.
We're out of time. Clare Lopez, thank you. Thank you for the insight. Thank you for the wisdom. God bless you and keep up the fight.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Clare Lopez, one of the nation's foremost experts on counterintelligence. You just heard it. That's what's happening in the world. Be prepared here. Be prepared, everybody. Be prepared. That brings us to the last part here. Some local upcoming events. First, October 21st, 6 o'clock, Blake Healy, author of The Veil and Indestructible. It's going to be here at On Fire Ministries. And then October 31st, we're screening the movie Letter to the American Church, 6 p.m., right here at On Fire Ministries. We're in this together. Let's be on our knees in prayer. Be prepared to defend the United States of America against the aggressors of tyranny, jihadis, and the communists. May God bless all of you. Keep up the fight.